either feeling like a threat in life or the mountains being a reminder of God's goodness. Well, here we go. If you want to open up your Bibles, or I'll just read it as well. We're in Matthew 8:23 verses 8:23 through 27. But the title of the sermon today of Moments with Jesus is Fear or Faith. And there is a question mark on there. It's like, in the storm, do you have fear or do you have faith? And that's not a criticism. It's not a judgment at all. It's boy, how are you going to respond in the storm? And I'd say kind of a tagline to fear or faith, we could also say about Jesus in this particular story, we see powerful and personal. So it's fear or faith or power and personal. And I want to throw a disclaimer out there because we're talking about storms. We're talking about storms of life, challenges of life, and two things. Please, throughout the whole entire sermon, do not hear me minimize your storms. All right, I'm not saying anything that's going to minimize what you go through, your pain, your suffering at all. This particular storm is what we would call an instructional storm, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So I'm not minimizing the storms of life you're going through. And as I talk about sort of the ways in which they or we should respond to storms, I'm also not like giving a pat answer to every storm. I'm not giving a black and white binary solution for every storm in life. All right. I'm kind of preaching the text and what jumps out from this particular storm for us. Good so far? All right. I'm not minimizing, and I'm not giving like this clean stamp for every single storm. Here we go. It's a very popular or very familiar story for us, and it reveals how powerful and personal Jesus is. It's another moment with the master. All right. Verse 23. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. A windstorm arose on the sea, so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him up, saying, Lord, save us. We're perishing. And he said to them, why are you afraid, you of little faith? Then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a dead calm. And they were amazed, saying, what sort of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? That's the good news of the Lord. Might seem like weird news, or like, come on, Jesus, are you kind of like some kind of tyrannical, narcissistic God who needs us to wait and call upon you? But this is Jesus saying, I'm good. All right, point number one. The storms are flippin' real. All right. The storms in our life are real. They're not fake. They're not pretend. We don't want to minimize them, and they're real. And in this particular story, we're going to learn that they can also be necessary. Some of our storms in our life are absolutely necessary for our training. And some of us might be thinking, holy cow, I'm tired of this storm. It's the same storm. I'm tired of this person or this situation or this lesson. Lord, I don't know how many times I've said, God, I'm pretty sure I've got this trust storm down. Like, I trust you, God. And God's like, nope. If you look inside, you can recognize that you still feel some anxiety. So storms are flipping real, and sometimes they're necessary. Verse 23 says this, and when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's important. Wherever Jesus goes, they follow him. So the question for us today in this one-liner verse is, where he goes, are we going to follow him? Where Jesus goes, they follow him. It's nighttime. It's likely nighttime. The disciples, although they're fishermen, all of the people of Israel have a history of being nervous about water, right? They've got the Dead Sea. They've got the Jordan. They've got floods. They've got memories of what we would call the deep. And so the disciples, they're still willing to follow Jesus into the sea. I think that's important for us to remember. Where are you willing to follow Jesus into? The text goes on. I don't want to say this. He was asleep. This is important before we even talk about the storm. Jesus was asleep in the boat. And what this says about him, something in particular it says about him, is that Jesus is human, right? Not only is he full deity, and he's fully human, meaning when this storm comes, he can identify. He's human. He's asleep. He's tired. He experiences hunger, fatigue, sadness. He is able to relate to their storm, your storm, and my storm. I feel like even though that might be not the whole purpose of the story, it's helpful to know that Jesus is tired and he's asleep and he knows what storms are like. The text goes on to say there was a storm that arose. Where does it say? And a windstorm arose on the sea. Here's what's fascinating about this storm. And this is where we kind of understand that this is no ordinary storm. This is not just a brokenness of the atmosphere. This is not just a normal weather pattern coming up. It often takes a matter of minutes or even hours for a storm to develop. And I'd like to say we would have heard a little bit about the storm on the horizon as they were getting into the boat, and they got into the boat and they noticed there was a storm. And maybe that's not what would have been written, but this is if you've ever hiked in the Utah canyons or anywhere where it's dry, there's often a risk of what you call flash flood. And you cannot determine when that flash flood is coming. This is what you call a flash storm. Storms happen all the time in the Sea of Galilee for two specific reasons. One, the Mediterranean Sea was about 600 feet above sea level. Sea of Galilee is 600 feet below. So you've got 600 feet to sea level, then another 600 feet above that is the Mediterranean Sea. So often the weather patterns of the Mediterranean Sea will kind of flush down into the Galilee area and cause storms. So on one side, in one area, you've got the Med Sea 600 above, and then below them, you've got Mount Hermon, which is 11,000 feet above sea level. And back then there was snow on top of Mount Hermon all the time, year round. So you've got the weather pattern at 11 grand coming down, swooping into Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea. They have pictures of the Sea of Galilee having up to 8-foot waves. That's huge. Like that is really good surfable weather. Okay. This is hurricane weather. It's what they would call a seismos, right? That's where we get the term seismic testing for earthquakes. This is a water earthquake. It's not a tsunami. It's not as big as a tsunami, but they call it this kind of storm a seismos, a water earthquake. So this is no small deal. Okay. And because it was not able to be determined, they couldn't predict it was coming. We sort of recognize that it's coming out of the blue. And so it's one of two things. This is evil, either evil trying to keep them from getting to the Gerasene demon, right? Jesus had just preached a sermon about being for everyone. And so they're supposed to get in the boat and they're going to go across to the Geradean or the cemetery where the demon possessed men are, and the Gentiles. We know the Gentiles because they had 2,000 pigs that went into the water, right? So it's either evil trying to keep them from getting there, or it's God saying, we need some instruction, disciples, because you're getting ready to hit the fan with some early church trouble. So that's a little bit of what's going on, if that makes sense. And the text goes on to say the boat was being swamped. Anybody ever feel swamped, meaning there's just too much? There's just too much going on. And I know this is cookies on the bottom of the shelf, like, oh, the boat's swamped. I felt swamped. This is an easy Sunday school lesson, right? This is real. Like, I want us to understand that God knows the burden of life, and life can swamp us from all directions at the spur of the moment. I don't know how many times on the job site or at the home site where you just get a curveball from the middle of nowhere. You weren't suspecting. You walk in the door after 8-10 hours of work, and boom, a family issue hits you, right? Your kids come to you, you're like, or your husband or wife come to you, and you're like, I'm not emotionally ready for this intensity. Can you guys calm down just a little bit? Like, I'm tired, I'm burnt out. But if you're emotionally stable enough, you can be like, and I've kind of eventually come to this place, honey or kids, right now in my emotional needs, need us to calm down just a little bit. I recognize this is important. We're going to talk about it, but please calm down. Like, the storms come out of nowhere. And the term swamped means, like, swamping means if the water is coming up over inside the boat, the waves are potentially 3 feet to 8 feet high, their boat is in the process of sinking, right? These are seasoned fishermen. And the waves are coming in the boat. They're submerging. It's violent. It's hard. Have you ever been in a boat that's got a lot of water in it and you're just bailing it out? Like, you've cut a gallon jug and you're like, or you've been in a canoe and you're like having fun in the summertime and you flip your canoe over and then you write it upside down and there's still lots of water. Yeah. And you got to bail the water out. It takes a lot of work to bail out any form, even a rubber dinghy raft you're playing in your, like playing wherever, right? It takes work. So picture these guys in the middle of the storm in this boat, not fully submerged, but swamped means they're submerging. You know, they're bailing the boat out. They're trying to bail the boat out. Hours and I would say maybe hours of bailing. And I wonder if we've ever been there. Here's what I think about people and maybe even Christians in storms. I'm not sure which one of these three storms you're in. Most of us are either headed into a storm, we're in the middle of the storm, or we're coming out of the storm, right? I wonder where you are most of the time. Like we're coming out of the storm. We're often finally got to this place where God's providing, or the counselor helped us, or we've partnered with our spouse just enough, or the money came through and we're finally out of the storm. So often we're either headed into the storm, in the middle of the storm, or coming out of the storm. And there are three kinds of storms so we kind of want to bring to our attention here. There's normal life storms that aren't caused by evil, aren't caused by God. There's just normal life storms because we live in a broken world where things are really, really challenging. The second kind of storm, though, is a correction storm, right? What we could call a punishment storm or a correction storm. This is not one of those. And I encourage us to be super careful whenever we see people going through something, to not say, you're going through that storm because. That can be very dangerous, condescending, judgmental, very pharisaical, if you will. But the third one is what we call an instructional storm. And this is what they're going through: a storm of instruction, a storm of training, a storm of endurance, a storm of teaching. And I want to pause again. As a pastor, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to know the mind of God of why God allows certain storms. And I'm not going to say this is instruction, right? But for them, this is. I can speak to this storm, and maybe you can speak to your own storm. This is instruction and training. And we're going to find out that the way Jesus responds demonstrates that this is what this is about. So they've got the storm, they're swamped. They're probably bailing, they're bailing and bailing. Who knows how long they're kind of just working on their own, sweating bullets or dripping with water, trying to bail themselves out of the storm. So they go to Jesus. And I feel like there's a tension between how you and I respond to God. I wonder where you land on this. I have two responses. One, I'm like the disciples and I'm bailing out water for a long period of time. And then I'm like, oh, I haven't prayed about this for a while. Then you pray about it and boom, it's taken care of. Whether that's often in my family, it happens when we're trying to find something, keys, a phone, whatever it might be, right? You're looking for a long time and you're like, Mom, Dad, have you prayed about this? You're like, oh man, I didn't pray about this. You pray about it and boom, you find it right away. Now, I don't want to tell you that that's a manual for how to do it every single time. And you may not find it every single time, but on repeat in my house, that's what happens. And I have no idea why God cares about me finding my keys. Maybe it's a scenario where God's just using an easy opportunity for us to give thanks. I have no idea. But I wonder if we can come to a place where our first reaction is they went to Jesus. Janet, Judy, Carolyn, Kim, Sheila, Tom, myself, the storm happened and we went to Jesus. Like, can we come to the point where we're so in love or so trusting of Jesus that our first knee-jerk response is go to the stern and wake him up right away? Don't try and bail it out for hours and hours. It's not going to work. Your boat is sinking. Talk to the captain, right? Talk to the captain right away. So point number 2 is how Jesus responds to them. Fearfully, are they fearful or are they faithful, right? And my answer to that is yes. It's not like one or the other. The answer is yes. Anybody with me on that? Fearful or faithful? Yes, that's me, Lord. Would you please help my unbelief? I know you're good. I don't know how many times I've been here. Lord, I know you're good. I know you love me. Right now, I'm nervous. December and January, half of January, I didn't have any work. And you've heard me share this over the past few sermons. And I just wondered, where in the world are you, Lord? You've provided the next day an abundant amount of money. Lord, where are you? You're not coming through. And I went, like I didn't waste time. I went to the stern. I said, Jesus, I need you. Wake up. There's a storm. And what happened in my particular case, in hindsight, looking back over the storm, my kids had off almost all of December. Mom had to work. I was able to go on vacation with Josie, then on vacation with Simon, and then we all got COVID. Had I had work, I would not have been able to spend time with my children. I would not have been able to care for the other three while they had COVID, right? I don't know if that was God. I'm going to give God the credit, or at least say, thanks, Lord, for knowing better than I did, right? And so for me, that's me going to the stern immediately and saying, Lord, help. But God saying, I'm going to help. You got to give it some time. I've got some other better things in the works than you can see right now. Let me give it some time. So they go to Jesus. He's asleep in the stern, and they say, Lord, save us. We're perishing, meaning we're dying. And he said to them, why are you afraid, you of little faith? You know it's bad when seasoned professional fishermen go to the carpenter for help, right? Did carpenters even have any reason to know how to swim back then? I don't know, but you know it's bad when fishermen go to the carpenter. And I wonder what Jesus's tone is with them when he says, why are you afraid, you of little faith? That's a question. For me, the Greek was not very explicit on the type of tone Jesus is asking this question. Often it's very explicit. It's either nurturing, exclamatory, or condemning, and I couldn't figure out what it is. Like, does he say to them, what's wrong with you? Come on, guys. Again? You've been with me. You've seen, like, look, you just saw the leper. You just saw the centurion's servant. I just preached this amazing message on the mountain. Like, what is wrong with you? Or, and again, this is conjecture. Or does he say, hey, guys, I know it's a storm. I know you're afraid. Where's your faith? I'm with you. I'm right here in the stern. Here's a fascinating thing about us and our faith. Jesus is even closer than 8 feet away in the storm because of the Holy Spirit living in us, meaning Jesus is even closer. And he's not even asleep in our storm. And again, I'm not minimizing the tragedy and suffering and repeat of our storms. If there's anything we might grab out of this text today, it would be, we have storms and they're real, and Jesus is in the midst with us. And I know that's an easy Sunday school takeaway, but it's just the truth. Like, if anything of this storm can teach us is that Jesus is continually trustworthy, no matter how long it takes for the storm in our life to calm down. So does he say, hey, where's your faith, guys? I'm here. Eventually he starts reaming them out. Like when he says, how long must I be with you guys? How long? Like, that's frustration, but I don't know what is here. Is he saying, are you afraid because you wish I came sooner? Like, I've been there. Are you afraid because you don't trust that I'm good? Are you afraid because you can't trust that I've got this? Like, I'm asking God every now and then, Lord, do you have this? Have you got this? And his non-audible voice is, I've definitely got this. Just keep praying. Are you afraid that I can't help, that I won't help, and that I don't love you? In our storms, is there any bit of fear causing us to ask the question of, God, do you even love me anymore? I know I'm a mess. I know I'm full of sin. Do you love me anymore? Because right now, captain in the boat, it just doesn't feel like it. Here's a little curveball of what we experience here. The truth is, and I'm kind of asking you this about your storm and your response. The truth is, they're afraid of their lives. They're afraid to die. They're not afraid of the bigger issue. And this is a little bit of judgment on them. And I want to be really careful of, I'm going to say it however it comes out of my mouth, but I want to, again, be careful that I'm not judging or criticizing us for our response. By them saying, don't you care about us, we're going to perish, it reveals to us that they're more concerned about their own lives their own safety and their own non-perishing than they are about the bigger issue of what's going on. And that's fair. Like, don't get me wrong. It is totally fair for them to say, or for me to say, God, don't you care about my family? I don't have any work right now. Where are you? Don't you care? My son is in the hospital in the ER again. Like, don't you care? I feel like that's a total fair response. But it's clear that they're more worried about themselves than the bigger issue of who God is, what God can do for them, and the real issue that's what's going on here. And what I mean by that is, in the storm, do we focus on our crisis, on our immediate need, or what we might be able to get out of this? And again, I say that gingerly because storms can be pretty horrendous. Are we open to something bigger that might be going on in the storm? Because it could be a correctional storm. It could be an instructional. Let me pause right there. Correctional storms are, we're sinning, we're doing things independent of God, and often those actions bring their own form of a storm. It's pretty rare that this side of the cross, God directly punishes us anymore. We reap the punishment from our own actions. So possibly in your storms, is there a way for you to calm down in the boat and say, Lord, what's going on here? God, do you have something bigger for me? Again, they say, why are you afraid? God says, why are you afraid? Of course I care about your provision. But he doesn't criticize them for coming to him. He comments on the fact that they don't trust him. This is a present day problem and a historical problem, right? They had something to learn, that there's something that God needs to stir up in them. And I wonder if there's something that in our storms, God needs to stir up in us. For me, I'm going to tell you, it's almost always a trust issue. That's for me. Whether it's finances, employment, my career for the future, trusting that God's got my back. Like, I think I could boil it down to trust. And I keep saying, God, I trust you. But in reality, like for me, I'm trying to come to this place in life where I'm able to be calm and content no matter the storm. Not because I'm inhuman or I'm a psychopath, but because I know how good God is. I want to come to that place. So here's the thing about this particular storm. This storm is our storm, right? We're part of a much, much bigger picture. We call this the metanarrative. Metanarrative meaning the big story. We're in this boat. This storm is our storm. It's a historical storm. It's a storm on repeat, right? Here's what I mean by that. If you go all the way back to Israel getting freed from Egypt, the Bible says God took them through the desert to test their faith, right? So that is an instructional storm for them. God is intentionally drawing them into the desert. One, they weren't ready to fight the Philistines, but the Bible's clear that he's testing them to develop trust in them. He knows they're going to have wars. He knows they're going to have Canaan. He knows they're going to have a history where they absolutely has to be drop dead, prime time in love with God and trust him. That's from Top Gun, by the way. You remember that? They're in the bar, like one of them's playing the piano and the hot lady or whatever, the movie star is like, does he love me? And then Meg Ryan's like, unless you are a fool, he's number one prime time in love with you. You guys remember that? Okay. Sorry, maybe I'm outing myself in some way. But anyway, unless we're a fool, Jesus is 100% prime time in love with us. And the storms, if they're instructive storms, are intentionally to develop trust. So the Israelites, they go into the desert for the one lesson of developing this endurance and trust with the Lord. The disciples, these babies right here, are the infants that are going to start the early church, a global impact. Can you imagine how much trust and endurance they needed to have, right? Trust of rejection. Most of these guys were tortured to death. Historically, it says non-biblical references tell us that most of them were tortured to the death. How much trust and endurance do you need to have to maintain this? Like, we're dealing with pandemic, we're dealing with politics, we're dealing with people and pressure in culture, we're dealing with the potential World War III. I don't know how serious that is, but People are thinking it, right? How much trust and endurance do we need? This is a familiar story. Like, put yourself in the boat, put yourself in the storm. We are part of the story of the Israelites, the disciples, the Walnut Creekians, and 200 years from now, we will be, those people will still be part of this historical meta narrative. And the meta narrative is struggle, trust, I'm here and near. Struggle, trust, I'm here, I'm near. That is on repeat. And if we are able and willing to say, Lord, I'm in the storm, I trust you, teach me. God's, and I know that's hard, but maybe I'm putting the cookies on the middle shelf now, not just the bottom shelf. This isn't a candy sermon, because the constant road of the Christian is the call for maturity, the invitation into holiness, like trust me, trust me, trust me, I'm good. Like, even if we don't trust God, God's still good. So God's constantly allowing opportunities for him to shine, for him to get credit. Being God, I don't know how this will land with you, but I'll share it. Being God's children in his hand does not promise a paved road of posies. All right, I'm using alliteration there on purpose. I'm not Baptist, but I thought I'd use it, right? Being a child of God in God's hand does not promise a paved road of posies, okay? What it does promise is powerful personal presence. If you're in a storm and you're trusting God, that is the safest place to be. If you feel like you're out on a limb in life, like that's an image of like, I'm out on a limb here, folks. I'm going out on a limb. I'm a little nervous. It's pretty thin out there on the edge. If you feel like you're out on the edge of a limb, but you're in God's hand, that's the safest place to be. If you feel like you're in the will of God, on the limb is the safest place to be, right? Not a paved road of posies, but power, presence, and personal. Let's close with this. Jesus calms the storm, right? He stands up. He stands up and says, he rebukes the storm. Now, whenever Jesus rebukes something, it's either evildoers like the scribes and Pharisees, or it's demons. So we're not fully sure if God has stirred this storm and allowed it for a training drill again, or it's the evil one keeping them to get to the Gentiles where they're going to save Gentiles. But Jesus stands up and he rebukes it. And he says, stop it. Now, on the Sea of Galilee, it usually takes hours for a storm to calm. This storm calms immediately. I feel like my storms don't calm immediately, but this, again, says something about God. Like, how long are your kids in the ER? How long are they struggling with mental, emotional life challenges? It seems like forever. I know somebody in our church has prayed for their husband to be a Christian for 30 years, and he became a Christian. 30 years! I've never prayed for anything for 30 years. And finally, the storm ends, and there's calm and peace. Like, no matter how long or quick the storm abates, God is still good. And if there's anything we get out of this, again, I've said this before, if there's anything we get out of this, it's the fact that we've got to come to a place where we trust that the guy in the stern is good, no matter how long it takes for the storm to end. And even if somebody falls out of the boat and drowns, right? God is still good. But here's what I love about Jesus's response. The storm does not wake up Jesus, right? Imagine the noise in the boat. Like, I don't know if there was lightning, but surely there's wind. If you've ever been in a boat with 12 people, a boat that's maybe 30 feet long, maybe 19 feet long, that's a congested boat. Guys are all over each other. The guys and gals, somebody's throwing up, right? I mean, you got 12 people, somebody's throwing up. So there's some noise. Like, there's noise in your house. There's noise in my car when I'm struggling. There's just chaos and noise. But what's fascinating to me is that the noise does not wake up Jesus. What does wake up Jesus? The cries of his children, right? Is that not precious? He had every reason to wake up by that storm, but he didn't, because he's God or because of whatever reason. But what wakes up the heart of God is the cries of his children. I want that to kind of land with us. Here's another image takeaway. Psalm 107 is a very popular psalm for fishermen. It's known, and I encourage you to read the whole thing. Psalm 107, most of the Jews knew the Psalms. They knew the Torah, the Pentateuch, and the law and the prophets. These guys were not smart enough to memorize it. That's why they were not following another rabbi. But fishermen knew Psalm 107, and specifically verses 23 through 30. And in that passage, it talks about men in a ship, merchant men in a ship in the middle of a storm. And they use the word Lord, capital Lord. That's Jehovah or Yahweh. And in the story, it says Jehovah came and raised them and calmed the storm. And in this picture, I'm not sure if this quip will land with you. Jesus goes to sleep, but Yahweh is the one who wakes up. Jesus lays down, but Jehovah stands up. I'm not sure what that means to you or how it'll land, but that's really just what's happening. Small L, Lord, goes to sleep, and capital Lord wakes up. So let me end with there. Maybe I didn't have enough stories or illustrations to kind of make it colorful, but I can't impress upon us enough the personalness and the empathy that Jesus has in our storm. And if you're able to come to a place in your Christian walk where you say, Lord, things are hitting the fan right now. I'm afraid and I believe. I'm fearful and faithful. Would you please help me? God, meet me where I am. I'm struggling, but would you help this to shape me? Amen.